aerospace and defense manufacturing,
machines and automation,
additive manufacturing,
smart manufacturing,
global manufacturing economy.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals, powered by SME. From the design screen to the shop floor to final assembly, we drive the conversation about making manufacturing smarter by connecting people who are passionate about manufacturing. Visit us at sme.org.
Today's episode is sponsored by our guest.
Hello and welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals. I'm your host, Amy Bryson, contributing lead editor of Smart Manufacturing magazine. Today we'll be discussing the role that ecosystem plays in the future of Industry 4.0, and that certainly is a big topic right now. Joining us is Mark Friedman. Now, Mark is the Product Ecosystem Senior Lead at Tulip Interfaces. Mark is a manufacturing industry veteran, and he speaks regularly about how, as companies move toward an open tech stack, they can future-proof their operations. So I want to thank you for joining us, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Now, before we dive into our topic, can you give our audience just a bit of background about you and the work you're doing over at Tulip?
Sure. So my name is Mark Friedman. My background's in manufacturing. So I was a lean person, big Kaizen guy, really into, manufacturing. And I like to describe myself as being kind of a customer of Tulip's who works at Tulip. I'm like a manufacturer who works at Tulip. And what we're doing really is bringing tools to manufacturing operations shop floor for the people who actually know the processes, who do the work, so they can solve their own problems. So it's really exciting because for so long in manufacturing, anyone who's been in it knows that Excel plays a significant role in solving problems, for example. And, I was, the Excel guy in a way, a lot on the shop floor. So I operated different value streams and was responsible for, delivery and all those things. But ended up creating a lot of tools. And at the time when I was doing that, there really wasn't a good option to create sustainable, good tools. And then I found Tulip, and ever since I'm basically solving the same problem I was solving before, but now I get to do it at a much larger scale with much better technology. And that's what we're doing here.
Wonderful. So can you tell us a little bit about, what your perspective is on an ecosystem approach to industrial operations?
Yeah, definitely. It's a big topic. I think one way of describing it well is probably with a story.
Sure.
So back in one of my previous lives, we were doing a lean transformation on a cell. We were trying to reduce the amount of line side materials. And, in doing so, we would run the risk of potentially stocking out the line if our processes weren't tight enough.
Mm-hmm.
So have you heard of Andon before? So Andon's this principle from Toyota Production System where, you would empower the line side associates to pull a cord, essentially, and that would shut the line down. And it's meant to encourage real-time problem solving, and a lot of times it's associated with a light bulb, a red, green light bulb.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So on this assembly line, we had light bulbs already up there, and we were like, great, let's use those. And when you follow the cords didn't work, the buttons didn't work. So we followed the wires to a black box on the wall, and you open up this black box. And what you find is a bunch of wires and, some electrical engineering genius from years before had created this system. And, we weren't able to use those lights, basically. It would have taken...
It sounds really ominous.
But this is really, really common, believe it or not.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff you see out there,
Yeah.
And all we really wanted was a light. So what we ended up doing, funny enough, is we just... printed out pieces of paper, laminated them and attached them to dowels, and that was our flag.
Wow.
So anyway, I guess my point here is that this is just a light bulb we're talking about, And when you think about smart homes and home automation, I can go to Best Buy right now, and I can buy any smart light that I want from any company, and I know it's going to work with Google, it's going to work with Alexa, it's going to work with all these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're used to in today's day and age for the kinds of technology available from an ecosystem. You can have rope lights, string lights, Christmas lights, any kind of light, any flavor of light you want behind the TV light. And they all work together because that's the way technology is today. But that's not the case in manufacturing, It's not this easy thing to do. In fact, if you were to Google, Andon lights, you'd find a few options. you'd find, you could find some on Amazon, but those are just like light bulbs with cords hanging out. And what do I plug that into?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Or you might find some proprietary like andon providers, but does their system work with, SAP?
Right.
Probably not. Does it work with these other systems? Probably not. So what do? You could go to these, you can call it like a walled garden versus an open ecosystem. You could, sign up for some very large company that sells everything from light bulbs to machines to their own digital hub and all this sort of stuff. But then you're kind of locked into their own personal ecosystem,
Yeah.
So I think this is a good story just because it demonstrates the problem pretty well. And there's kind of an analog to a proven solution with consumer electronics and consumer technology, which is, you should be able to choose,
Yeah.
and that's what it means. But it doesn't just mean that for lights. It means that for every problem that you might face. There's plenty of problems in manufacturing. So it's not just software, it's also, it's obviously hardware as well. And it's also allowing this sort of composability so that if later on down the line I want to take those light bulbs out and I want to put in something new, maybe I want to have one that has buttons on them or something, maybe I want to have ones that I'm going to use for reordering materials. I should be able to plug and play these things.
Yeah. I think you bring up some really interesting points that speak to the importance to get on the ground floor and the shop floor level to talk about the problems that people are like frontline employees are facing versus trying to, instill this top-down implementation of what the latest and greatest buzz phrases, especially around things like Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing. I mean, do you have a lot of conversations with your customers around how to approach problem solving?
Oh, definitely. It's one of those things that we talk about all the time. I mean, Tulip is a problem-solving tool. It's a Kaizen tool, So there's a lot of ways that people will traditionally approach this, especially when you think about software. It's really common for people who are approaching, software for their manufacturing operation to really dig into all the things that it can do. Can it do everything? Can it be my silver bullet? And before they even get started, they're trying to solve every problem they ever had,
Yeah.
And where we really like to take things and where I encourage that it should be approached this way is really just solve a problem, really get on the shop floor, speak with the operators, observe, understand the problem you're trying to solve, and then build a point, like a small solution, just fix one thing. Start small. You don't have to fix every problem, because if you spent all that time understanding all of your problems and you created the most beautiful and elegant, magnificent, connected solution for everything all at once, by the time you deploy that, if you accurately understood your problem, your conditions would have changed. You have new products now. You have new demand profiles now. Everything's changed. So it's all about rapid iteration. It's about building something, solving a problem, and then expanding from there, and then finding another problem to solve. And knowing that whatever problem you've solved, you're not locked into that. You don't have to go call some IT department from a company who doesn't know your operation and get them to produce some new feature or whatever for your solution.
So how can, say, a traditional manufacturer get a jump start on kind of a new way, a new industrial tech stack? How do you recommend they go about approaching that?
It's kind of like I just described, where you want to not think that you're going to find a silver bullet. So like tactically, look for problems that make an impact on the shop floor that actually help someone and make their lives easier. Because for people who have tried to do lean maybe incorrectly, the shop floor folks know this. So like the term 5S, it's a beautiful concept and it's really effective. But if you don't respect the current state well enough when doing that, it has a synonym. I'm not sure if you've heard people talk about 5S, but what that means, they're going to throw away my stuff. That's what that means to a lot of people. It's like, oh no, they're going to throw away all my stuff. So I guess what I mean here to say is that if you're going to get started with this, make a real difference to someone's life, because that buy-in is critical, and then and don't expect it to work right away either, because it's more important that person is able to give you some feedback in real time and say, oh, you know what, I kind of wish this button was here, or, I didn't quite do it. I want to know about this thing or that thing, or whatever the case is, whatever their input is, for you to be able to rapidly make that change with them almost in real time.
Yeah.
It's incredibly powerful, because it ushers in like sort of this new paradigm for how we can solve problems. And then people start getting ideas, and people start coming up with new things they want to fix. Then you get a new champion, and so I think that's really important, is to, focus on a problem you can solve quickly, just to get into the motion of this sort of idea of continuous improvement, leveraging technology.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say is, maybe you don't know what tools or technology to use, and you're having a hard time figuring out what providers to use. Now, obviously, I am a fan of Tulip. That's why I work here.
Yeah.
But, if you're looking at technology in general, I would suggest looking for technology that embraces this open ecosystem approach. Like a good tell would be if their software doesn't have an API. If it doesn't have an API, then you may want to wonder why.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to connect with other things very easily. A lot of people want to do it that way.
That's a great tip for people who are listening is, if you can give, our listeners a few more things, what should they be asking to ensure that they're going to put themselves in a position for success?
Oh, geez. I mean, that's there's a lot of nuance in that question. It depends on what problem you're trying to solve, but
sure,
I can give you an example. Like some people we talk to, they're maybe asking the wrong questions, or they're trying to fit a solution onto a problem that they're imagining.
Oh.
So, like, the questions I would ask are more about your own process. An example would be this, like, maybe you want to do some kind of material replenishment system. You're having stockouts, you're having shortages, and you want to then come up with this idea that we're going to weigh everything. That's how we're going to handle this.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put super expensive scales under every bin we ever have in the building, and that's how we're going to solve this problem. And then everything they're looking at is how we get these super smart scales under all of our bins. But in reality, the question you should be asking is more like, why is this failing, and how can I help the people who are trying to be disciplined potentially in replenishing these materials? What kind of simple tooling can I use to help that person? So it kind of changes the stance, because the problem is now different. Now you just need to talk to the people who are using the solution and come up with something simple and sustainable. Generally speaking, if the system that you're looking to implement is going to take a ton of overhead to manage and maintain, then you're probably just introducing new problems.
So you've taken away someone's stuff, and then you're asking them to work with stuff they don't want to use.
Yeah, that's a good
Sounds great.
Yeah. And then the person who could potentially make that thing work for them is not even working in the building. Definitely I believe in democratization. I believe that the people on the shop floor know the process the best. And if they can be empowered, there's a reason why they're the ones who make the Excel files that get used. So if this software can enable you to solve problems that you understand best, then this is likely a good solution.
What about for companies that are further along in their kind of transformation journey?
So for companies like that, in some cases it's about the technology, but it's really about the approach. So companies that we see do this on a very large scale, they really double down on this open architecture and standardization. So things like a center of excellence, across the enterprise, they can hold standards that they can sort of rapidly deploy across their different operations.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess like an example of this would be, just to make a very practical example, is a very common practice is monitoring performance. You should be able to walk by any cell and know whether it's winning or losing at a glance, right? This is like a lean principle.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, if you were, just getting started in your journey, or maybe not looking at it, or you're early on, you could be forgiven for creating like a single table or Excel file or something that records your actual output.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you take that further and you imagine that happening across multiple operations and cells and value streams, then how many different files are you going to have and formats are you going to have for that information? So this is like a pretty simple example, because it explains the need to have sort of standard models that you might use.
Yeah.
People call these sometimes like unified namespaces or things like that. But people who are further along in their transformation journey really standardize on some of these kinds of data storage ideas so that it's easy to roll all these things up. So that's definitely one thing I would say, is this open architecture and shared code base, or shared idea, shared library And that's something that's really important. I mean, you see that with GitHub, I mean, this sort of open idea, this isn't going anywhere. We didn't invent it, but it also belongs in manufacturing,
Oh, yeah.
But it's that sort of idea is to build on each other's work and document each other's work so that you're not creating just some new problem down the line like that wire thing I told you about with the Andon.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about this, but I'm wondering if you have additional examples or context for companies that are embracing lean. How should they approach that open ecosystem?
So lean's one of my favorite topics. Here's how you can think about this kind of open, no-code, democratized sort of solution. Have you heard of Creform before?
No.
Or maybe 80-20 or...
Oh, yes. The Peretti 80-20 principle.
Yeah. So if whoever is listening and you don't know what this is, I would recommend you Google Creform. And what you'll see is a bunch of like structures made out of pipes. And I love this analogy because the people who work on operations, and I was in operations, I'm not a furniture maker, and none of my colleagues were furniture makers. We went to school and did whatever, but we had to build workstations, and we had to build special racks to solve a very specific problem for this one person or this one cell. And Creform is beautiful for this because all you need is an idea and a pipe cutter and an Allen key. And you can create, it's like Legos, kind of. You can create any station or idea that you want. And there's some really neat ones out there. But the point is that it makes this sort of capability available to people who don't have that skill set. And for that reason, Creform is like an excellent lean Kaizen tool, because within a couple days, you can create a whole new U-shaped cell with a whole new way of having material flow.
Wow.
And that's how I would recommend people think about software like Tulip and this no-code open ecosystem approach is that, just like with Creform, you can buy little specialty widgets to put on it. You can do the same sort of thing with software. So the same capabilities that are now available to a person who wasn't trained in creating physical structures can make technological structures in the same amount of time.
Wow.
So you have this new capability. So it's really a toolbox that I think anyone who uses Lean, I'm convinced that Taiichi Ohno, if he knew about this, if this was around back during the beginnings of the Toyota production system, I'm convinced that this would be something he'd be a big fan of because why would you not want that tool,
Yeah, I imagine when you're talking to people who do embrace Lean, they have a little bit of a light bulb moment when you walk them through that scenario.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, there's other things you can do too. I mean, so some people who embrace Lean, they use these kind of tools to actually source Kaizen ideas. There's actual applications they build that just let anyone walk up and sign up and type in an idea, and then that all gets logged. And what people do with Lean often is they use the tools they have available to them to make a difference. So it's very common to see an hourly scorecard out next to a cell, which is often an Excel sheet printed out, or maybe it's a whiteboard, and people walk over and use it. And they do that because that's a visual way of gathering data that is accessible to people who don't have the skill to make the software,
Yeah.
So it's really neat because there's so many opportunities like that throughout manufacturing. That's how I would think about it if I were doing that. The other thing I would say about Lean is, I'm not sure, there's certain tools that we share across, like, so the operator loading chart, a standard work document, these sorts of things are like time study sheets. These sort of things are kind of standard, and they're pretty common across the board, but they're not that effective. It's just an Excel file you print out and then, what happens with it. So I would think that when you create your own business system with these sort of digital tools, that you think about them as well as this kind of open architecture shared thing.
Yeah.
Like there could be a lean diagnostic app that you put off to one of your new areas just to gather time studies automatically, stuff like that.
Yeah, that opens up a whole new world of possibilities, especially for people who might have an idea, but they don't know really how to either articulate it or if it's even relevant to a given situation. It allows them to participate in problem solving for sure.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, this is this is very much a lean tool because you get that buy-in on the ground floor. It's iterative by design, So, lean to me is really about a mindset and continuous improvement. And that's exactly what this kind of stuff is.
Yeah, it gets people involved and makes them feel more connected to what they're doing and who they're doing it with, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, think about the alternative. I mean, I was working at a company and we were on a version of an ERP that still had a black background and green text, and you could only navigate with the keyboard.
Oh my God.
I mean, this is not unusual. I mean, it's the opposite of continuous improvement.
Yeah.
These systems are, I mean, people are still on these old systems.
Wow.
Because that's the way that technology used to be.
Wow, that's crazy. So let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about, where do companies typically fail when they're building a solution ecosystem, and what lessons can be learned through those, missteps, so to speak?
I'd say it's tough because when you go if you go too bottoms up with it, that can be a problem. And if you go too top down, that can be a problem. So you really do have to find that balance. One example of this might be if you have someone who is maybe the Excel person at your company or whatever, and they start solving problems using these kinds of tools, that person could very easily, and it'd be understandable because they get one win and they're like, okay, I'm going to do another, I'm going to add on to it. If you fast forward a little bit, it's possible that the entire operation becomes outfitted with one person's brain, essentially, that only this person understands. So now you have this you've kind of created what you tried to avoid.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great because it's really well adapted to your environment specifically. But if that person leaves, that person gets promoted, something like this, then you may not be able to actually continue the journey. So I would definitely argue that people can fail if they put too much complexity or too much dependency on one person to really drive this, and instead double down on making it more modular, making sure that other people understand how it works, and making it a shared sort of experience. So I would definitely say that's one opportunity. The other is if you don't have enough top-down mindset, I suppose, because we get into the problem I discussed earlier where I like analogies a lot. So I'll use another analogy.
Sure.
Like insects evolves flight, but so too did, birds. And they did this differently. They both can fly, but they have completely different architectures for their wings and strategies here. And I think that's a risk as well, because you do want to enable that kind of evolution, but you want to have some sort of governance so that when you scale and you want to deploy across sites or across enterprises, you're not having to reinvent. So I think having a digital strategy is really important, and focusing on these simple problems. A lot of the same points we talked about. That's what I would recommend: is a lot of sharing, a lot of standardization where possible, but without stopping that evolution. Because if you could do it, if you can see how you could do either. If you did too much in one way, you would stop the natural evolution, right?
Yeah.
But if you go too much on the natural side, then you may struggle to transfer that, for example, from one facility to a new one that you're going to create. Or, best practice sharing. You're going to have all your opcos go to this facility and they're like, oh, I love what you did there, I want to take it. And then the person says, oh, no, you can't, because we didn't build this thinking about you.
Well, you talked a little bit, during this conversation around empowering everyone based on not just their job function, but, because everybody is involved in, one common goal. It's not just one operator. Where do you think training, upskilling, certifications, accreditations, teaching, that whole teaching mechanism, where does that fit into this conversation?
So, like teaching to use this sort of new technology stack?
Yeah, a lot of conversation around, workforce development, training, avoiding when you have someone, let's say, who's getting ready to retire and they have that historical legacy knowledge, and you're bringing on new talent. How does this conversation, relate to, building a solution ecosystem?
Well, it depends on the kinds of tools that you're using. I'm biased towards Tulip because I think no-code tools are very much the future of this. Like I said, it's sort of the Cree form of software. So lowering the bar is really, really important. And that's what this does. That's what this new technology enables, is lowering the bar so that it can be taught. You know, if you're talking about something like SAP or you know, Salesforce or whatever, if you want to customize that kind of stuff, you have to be pretty much an expert in that, you know? So the first part to even make this doable is to lower the bar. So that's something that no-code tools like Tulip allow you to do. And then it's really a question of just your own culture, you know? So I would think that we've seen it happen really well. There's a lot of really good, like, free courses that we offer and stuff like that. But there's also some cool training programs. So I would recommend that, you know, once you start your journey, add that to essentially your lean training program. You know, I mean, people train on standard work all the time. People train on this sort of stuff. Just train on these tools. And there are some really great exercises. So, you know, there's a lot of people who use the Lego exercise in lean to kind of teach, you know, basic lean principles like one piece flow and things like that. Well, we have exercises like that with digital systems, where you first build it manually, and then you talk about the problems that you've observed. Maybe it's around order tracking or traceability or quality tracking or something like this, and then the exercise to actually work together in this exercise to create a solution, and then you discuss those solutions, and that gets people excited because it really can happen quickly. And I think if people start getting that, you know, that aha moment, what happens is that you start looking at problems differently. Problems that you thought, I'm not going to solve this because I don't have the tools to do so. Now you look at problems a little bit differently. I'll give you a little example of this. Like, there's one facility that I worked at. They had this, you know, they would have a shortage on one part of the facility, and then they would send text messages, or they have a walkie-talkie, and they would call the other side, and then if they didn't answer, then they would walk over to that side, and they would get the material or see if the material is ready, and it wasn't ready, so they'd walk back. And this happens all the time, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a problem that, you know, I don't know how I would solve that, really. Maybe I'd try and figure out the root cause of that and maybe play with the ERP or whatever. But what you could do in literally a day or less is build a very quick communication application, you know? It has a screen on one side, a screen on the other. The person misses a part, they scan something, it shows up on the other side, and now you have what amounts to like a McDonald's order screen.
Yeah.
And you can actually do that in a very short period of time with very little training. So showing people that this is possible,
Yeah.
in sort of a systematic way, is really about demonstrating the value that this kind of solution offers. And then people will naturally kind of gravitate towards, I think, these solutions.
Yeah, I think that's an important part around, you know, it's exciting to think about lowering the bar of complexity. So really making it simple so that people can make substantive changes and make their days better, their jobs easier, and feel more successful. So what else do you think is, you know, exciting as you think about this shift to this new approach heading into 2024? What are you looking forward to most?
Well, I'm excited about a lot of things, but I will add to the previous question, I guess, a little bit more, that I think it's important that we celebrate the achievements and the solutions people create. I think that's like a really critical part of this, because it really is cultural as well. I mean, the technology is an enabler, no doubt about it. But when someone creates something that works, celebrating that does a lot for propagating the improvement. So celebrating that, having a wall of app of the month or something, you know, this kind of thing is really good because it gets awareness a little bit higher.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I think the seed of training is people like, oh, what is that? I didn't know that someone made that. I want to learn that too. You know, it's a motivating factor. And then the training piece is there's thousands of ways to train people on things, and I recommend everyone go about it their own way. But what's exciting to me about this new approach, first of all, it actually helps people. People are working in these jobs all day long, and that one thing that really bothers them, they can't find that part. They're looking around. It's a frustration for them. And if you can make a difference for that person, you know, it's their life.
Yeah.
It's a significant portion of their life. So I think it's really exciting because it's not a fiction. It actually does help people, and it's fun to do this sort of thing. I mean, maybe that's just me personally, but the more the technology evolves and the more people who become aware of it, you get new tools, new tricks. More and more people are joining this sort of new tech stack. So we're getting new partners that have really neat tools that work with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if you've been following much of what Tool's been doing with our ecosystem here, but there's some really awesome examples. So I'll give you one example, Landing AI. It's this AI company. AI is everywhere these days, and training a model on how to identify or count items. I'm not sure if you ever tried doing that, but a couple of years ago, or even a year ago, if I wanted to do that, I'd have to talk to our internal AI expert and be like, help me train this. I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
But now that we have the sort of the ecosystem starting to develop and grow, we have a partner, Landing AI, like I said earlier. They make that very, very easy, drag and drop. I take 10 pictures, I throw them on their tool, I drag a little box over things and label them, and then I can use that in my operation. And I have no idea how this works,
Yeah.
So it's exciting because we're seeing all these awesome products coming out that I want to play with. I don't even know the problems I can solve. So like one of our facilities, I couldn't believe it. They have a drone flying around their warehouse, scanning things. And I've always wanted to play with a drone.
Yeah.
So this is like a superpower that it's fun, So I think it's exciting because any idea you have, there's probably a product for it. There's probably a company out there who's part of this ecosystem, and because the bar is so much lower because of platforms like Tulip, I could actually use it. So I think it's really exciting because there's this huge gap between what we're used to in our daily lives and what's available to people on the shop floor, and it's just rapidly closing.
Yeah.
Because every person in the shop floor almost has a cell phone, a supercomputer in their pocket.
Yeah.
And yet I still have to pick up a walkie-talkie and then walk over to the other side of the building to figure out if I have that part,
Yeah, and I love that a few years ago that the solve for that was to get Segway personal scooters.
Yeah. So the thing that's exciting about it is it's just that we're still living in the past.
Yeah.
So the more of these sort of solutions that become available to people to leverage, it feels like a superpower.
Yeah.
It's like you always wonder what it would be like to go back in time with, today's technology and how cool that would be. And that's what is actually happening.
Yeah.
So it's really neat to see that.
Yeah, it is. It's like, manufacturing in a lot of places is the past, and bringing in modern technology that's not just flashy, but actually practical. And, what you've talked about is you don't have to be a programmer to solve problems. You're really you're democratizing it and helping people gain the confidence to solve problems in a new way that's not complicated and can kind of bring people together. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I wonder why. I mean, I have ideas why it hasn't reached the manufacturing floor in so many ways. I think it's because it's such an organism. It's always changing.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a dynamic, complex organism, a manufacturing floor,
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, I mean, sure, there's, when you get the technology, people think about maybe Tesla's new factory or something that uses all robots, and I'm not sure how many millions, but very expensive to have built that. But realistically, that's not the way that the landscape is,
right? Yeah.
I'm not even sold that that's the way that the Tesla factory is. And if someone from Tesla is listening to me, then invite me to look at your factory. I love looking at factories.
Yeah, I want to come too.
Yeah, I mean, I like looking at these factories a lot. But I mean, when you put all that engineering work into it, away from the shop floor, and it's built somewhere, but people who are by profession coders, not people who work every day on the shop floor with the people who make the things happen, there's this divide. And as that divide shrinks, you're able to make your solutions as organic as the environment necessitates.
Very cool. Well, we've covered a lot today. Is there anything else you think our listeners should know that we haven't talked about?
So I would recommend, if this interests you at all and you want to dip your feet into this, I would suggest going to Tulip's website, tulip.co, and there's a free trial, and try it. See if you can get value from it. Maybe this is exactly the kind of thing you want to play around with. If you go to tulip.co/library, we talked earlier about believing in standards and making things open, like open source kind of thing. So that's what the library is. Explore that. You can see a bunch of example videos of solutions, and you can actually deploy some of the things we're talking about. Some sites have downloaded stuff from the library and then gone up and running in just a couple days.
Wow.
So maybe try it and see if it works for you. I mean, like, that's the thing about manufacturing that I think is so great, is that it's real. If the thing you're putting in place doesn't actually add value, then it's not gonna stick around. So try it. I mean, try playing with these things. If you find yourself making Excel file after Excel file and you want something better, or whatever this is, or you have some special nuanced problem you want to solve, get the trial and see if it works for you, and reach out. You can reach out to me directly if you want to, or anyone on my team. I'm sure we'll help you out. We've got a lot of people here who do this every day trying to help people. So try it out. That's what I would say.
Wonderful. Well, listeners, make sure that you take Mark up on his offer, reach out, give it a test for yourself and see what's possible. And Mark, I want to thank you again for your time, and I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Make sure you stay up to date on all things that's happening in manufacturing, and hear more podcasts by visiting us at sme.org.